titled Hope or Hoax, Envisioning a New Ground in the Middle East. My name is Burhanettin Duran. I am General Coordinator of SETA Foundation in Turkey. Today, we will discuss the new possibilities of a new order in the Middle East with, of course, 4 distinguished speakers. All of us are watching what's happening in the world. The international system has been passing through a chaotic transformation. Headlines are telling us that the world is becoming much more chaos, conflict-oriented. Great power rivalries, the possibility of a nuclear war, or terrorism, proxies, climate change, and the great power rivalry reality as a reality are on the global agenda. So, in such an environment, what is happening in the Middle East? Can we have a new Middle East, especially after October 7? We have seen the Israeli massacres in the last 5 months of Palestinians. And of course, this is undermining any claims of human rights, freedom, justice, humanity, and all of these values that are supposed to be as the norms of the international order have been losing their significance. So, well, in the Middle East, we are very familiar with crisis. We have seen a lot of them. But this time, after the pandemics and the war in Ukraine, this is a very transformative conflict. I believe that there will be, I am not happy with that, I am not happy with saying that, but there will be more tensions and conflicts all around the world, and also they will have their implications in the Middle East. In such an atmosphere, we have to ask, is this hope or hoax? Of course, we have to keep alive the hope of envisioning a new Middle East. Of course, to attain justice, freedom, security, and stability at the same time. Well, as I said before, we have 4 distinguished speakers. All of them are very specialized. They have a very great expertise on the Middle East issues. I will start with presenting them, and I will lead them to questions. They will answer the questions, and in the last 15 minutes, we will have your comments and questions. Well, Wattah Kanfar is the president of Al-Sharq Forum. He has been writing on Middle East issues, and all of us know him very as very familiar person. And Daniel Levy is the president of U.S. Middle East Project. He's very specialized on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the attempts to have a peace process. So he knows the problems and the possibilities of any peace process after the conflict in Gaza. Also, we have David Hurst. He is editor-in-chief of the Middle East Eye, very well-known journal. And he is also expert on Middle East issues, including Saudi Arabia and the issue of Palestine. Last and not least, Faisal Davce is a journalist, and he knows the conflict areas and also the experience of South Africa, the ending the apartheid regime. As I said to you before, we are very lucky today to have all of them together. Well, I will start with you, Wattah. I talked about the erosion of the norms, values, in trying to have human rights order, political order. And do you think that the West-based international system, and particularly Western countries, still has a kind of example or model position for the countries in the Middle East, especially after the Israeli massacres in Gaza?
Thank you very much. One of the most important descriptions of the current moment is that the old is about to die and the new is not ready to be born. Now, what is the old in this case? It is the Western-centric world order that has been promising the humanity liberal values, basically. Human rights, rule of law, equality, justice, democracy. All of the above mentioned have become tools in the hand of the powers and failed to achieve what the values originally have been established for, which I do believe in their original form and shape. But today, the current crisis in Gaza, the current genocide taking place in Gaza, and the fact that most of the Western governments, and on top of that, of course, the American administration, are complicit in this genocide, can tell you that no one from now on can advocate such values to anyone in the world. We have known for some time now that hypocrisy and racism, actually, embedded in the philosophy and practice of power in the Western system, but it was, in a way or another, covered by many other techniques. Now it is very, very explicit. So, to answer your question, maybe we in the Middle East are the last comers to realize the fact that the West, in its power structure, is not capable of introducing any peace to the world. Maybe Latin America found this before us. Africa found that before us. Maybe Asia found out for. We were, because of the proximity to the West, to Europe in particular, and because most of our political intelligentsia and political elite are a sincere product of the Western school of thought, we were deceived and we were not able to see the truth. Because of Gaza, we can see it black and white, very easy. This is number one. And second, and the most important element in this case, what is going to happen after this? I think the collapse of the model, the Western-centric model of governance and politics and world order, will lead eventually to rise of a regional order, not at this stage, because most of the political elite in the region are operating within the ceiling of the Western, especially the American interest, which on its turn operates on the ceiling of the Israeli interest. So, but what you described is right. We are going into a state of chaos, and that state of chaos will yield new architecture in the region that will shape a solid geopolitical center that could create some kind of order. And as far as the world is concerned, Gaza is playing the role of accelerator of transformation in the world order, from the west to the east. And therefore, if we are thinking about the next 4 or 5 years, a conflict between the United States of America and its allies and China and its allies, I would say Gaza, as Ukraine before it, is playing that kind of acceleration. And because the concept of global south, which started in a way or another during Ukraine, because most of the global south did not really subscribe to the American and European narrative on the issue of Ukraine and Russia, right now it is becoming even much more clear. And when you look at the pattern of voting in the United Nations and the General Assembly, you could easily detect that people are sick and fed up of the way that the Americans and European governments are handling the crisis, not only in Palestine, but the crisis in Palestine became so explicit, so bloody, so dramatic to an extent that no one can really evade but look directly at it and say, shame on you, because you have failed the world and you have failed your ideals and you have failed what you have been preaching to the entire world.
Thank you, Wata. Well, your point is telling us that this norm-based rule of international system has to be just first to be kept by the US and other Western countries. So coming to Daniel Levy, the US is in the forefront of many criticism regarding the conflict in Gaza. And unconditional support given to Israeli massacres in Gaza are leading to some anti-Western, anti-US criticism. So then this question comes into my mind. What could be done by the Biden administration? What are the measures to be taken to make ceasefire possible and then peace efforts into tangible actions that we can have a new ground in the Middle East? So is the US ready to pay for such a role when coming the elections?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge, what was embedded in your question and what Wadah just talked about, which is the emperor has no clothes. The US now stands, and it's hardly breaking news to anyone that there is hypocrisy in the conduct of global affairs. But the extent to which, off the back of 2 years of America lecturing the world from this moral pedestal of we are the upholders of a rules-based international order, of international law, and here it is, in all its brazen nakedness and hypocrisy and transparency, an America that is not just failing to work for a ceasefire, but that is actively arming, even as we have a case before the International Court of Justice of the plausible committing of violations of the Genocide Convention. Here it is actively arming this, predicated on racism, predicated on many other things, a broken system. And let me address what you asked in terms of what could be done to change this by critiquing the two things that the US has done in its approach. First of all, you have a president who, as time has gone on, has expressed frustration. We even have reports that he has called the Israeli Prime Minister rude names in conversations. Now, I'm sorry, but this isn't serious. This is not leverage. This is not trying to achieve a ceasefire. We have seen some interesting kind of legislative and executive acts, mostly executive acts. So we saw an action taken to deny access to the financial system and sanction a number of Israeli settlers. Now, this is very curious. You have a massacre going on in Gaza, and the action you take is addressed to a handful of extremists. The Israeli settlement project is not the action of a few individuals. This illegal project is, and I am very familiar with it firsthand, is the action of a state. You can't have settlers without the state confiscating the land, arming them, providing them water, infrastructure, security. So the US has tried to look as if it might care for those who aren't really paying attention, but it has desisted from doing the things, and I am convinced of this, that could actually bring this to a relatively rapid closure. And next week it's 5 months, okay? Violations of international law, horrors on October 7th. Violations of international law every day since against the Palestinian civilian population. And as I said, what it would require is addressing the hard things in the bilateral relationship with Israel. the provision of weapons in particular, and to desist from providing political, diplomatic, and where possible, for the US legal cover to Israel. So we saw in the last week the US appearing in court at the ICJ with regard to the other case being considered for an advisory opinion. Now, I'm not saying that if America did those things, the next morning it would be over. What the US would have to do is to sustain a standoff, to be able to stare down an Israel which absolutely is reliant and dependent on the US over a period of days, perhaps weeks. But then I think the Israeli system would begrudgingly have to shift. The second thing that I would suggest they are getting horribly wrong, although I don't want to tell you that this is from naivety. I think that's too generous. And of course, there are those in the US system who know this, who would prefer a different policy. But that's not the president, and that's not how the politics stack up. The other thing they're doing wrong, and this is a cautionary message for other state actors and for the international community and perhaps for all of us, is they are trying to feed us this idea that the morning after we can go back to a peace process. But this time we'll be serious when we say the words Palestinian state. We might even recognize something. They don't say what they're going to recognize, what the borders would be, what the sanctions would be for the country that would be in illegal occupation of the thing that they recognize. But they want us to believe that there is this seriousness and this rosy possibility of a day after. But the tools they are bringing to the day after are precisely the same approach that has failed until now, and we can guarantee it will fail again. For those of you who were upstairs for the opening speeches, you saw that map of the vanishing Palestinian territories, of the Israeli settlements. And I think what they're telling us is that map of these tiny islands of Palestinian presence, we'll call that a state, as if no one will realize that it's actually a Bantustan. Now, I don't want to suggest that it's all bad news, because I do think that there is pushback. And I think we saw an interesting part of that pushback this week in Michigan, in Ann Arbor, a college town, in those primaries. You know, it takes an effort to go out and vote uncommitted. So I don't think one should underestimate, whether in the US or elsewhere, the extent to which publics are not buying this. They're seeing through the lies of their political leaders. The extent to which people in so many places see the injustices in their own society and the injustices in the global order being played out in such a stark fashion on the question of Palestine. And so that gives me hope that the environment in which leaders and in which the American president is operating may be shifting, but so far, no. The Americans could end this, and they have chosen not to.
Well, Daniel, you are not optimistic about the Biden administration or any American president's next administration, yes. But you gave us a light of hope, especially for the publics. If the continuing failure of this Western initiative or their discourses on Gaza crisis is creating some revolutionary impacts on the publics, including the American, the Western, maybe the Israeli ones, I will come to later, then we can still keep this hope alive. Well, from here, I want to ask David Hurst, what would be the impact of this failure of the Western governments in resolving this conflict, but with a special reference to the Middle East, if this, campaign of Israeli massacres continues?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. I think we're at a very, very significant moment in the regional order of the Middle East. Make no mistake about it, what's happening now will determine how the Middle East looks for 10, 20 years. And if we just stand by and watch it happen, we're going to have to all deal with the consequences. And this is not the moment for standing by. This is the moment for bravery. The West isn't showing any bravery. There's a key distinction between Ukraine and Gaza. Ukraine is fundamentally a European and a regional war, but it doesn't actually, at the moment, have a global resonance. I mean, nuclear war, yes, but we won't probably get there. Gaza is the exact opposite. Gaza isn't having a regional impact. It should. But it is becoming a global cause. And it really is becoming a global cause. And you can see it on the streets of London every single day. Those streets are not being represented by either political parties. There's the Conservatives who are now going into an election campaign basically on the Great Replacement theory, on the idea that sort of Islam is un-British. And there are increasing attacks on British Muslims, and this is no joke at all. And you have a Labour leader who is more Zionist than Ed Miliband was, who was a Jew. And Starmer has quietly, long before Gaza, abolished Labour Party policy on declaring a Palestinian state. He's now saying that can only be declared with Israel's agreement. And we know exactly what sort of state that would look like from Daniel. And he has stood absolutely foursquare behind stopping a ceasefire. And the debate in Parliament last week was obscene. Because what happened was that the only people who actually represented 66% of the British population that's saying immediate ceasefire now is actually the SNP, the Scottish National Party. And their vote was, through various mechanisms, undone by a parliamentary speaker who knew what he was doing. He didn't want to create a split in the Labour Party. And he said, I'm doing this because there are some MPs who are being physically threatened, i.e. the apologists for genocide turned themselves into the victims of anti-Semitism. And this is a very deep thing. This is now internalized the Middle East. This is now a British problem. This is now becoming an identity problem about what is a British Muslim, what is a British Jew. So you expect this lot to provide a foreign policy. Forget it. Really forget it. This is a really deep crisis. And I don't say these words lightly about British democracy. And British democracy is being defeated by people who say they're the Democrats. It's not being, and demonstrations on the streets of London in favour of it are now being called mobs. So they are completely unrepresented. So we're in a really deep crisis of democracy in Britain, and I think also in Biden. So what has to happen? The regional powers in the Middle East really have to sit up and get working. I mean, I'm sorry, but how can you listen to President Erdogan's speech and then remember that Turkey is continuing to trade with Israel? Now, what's going on here? What about airdrops? Okay, airdrops don't work. But what about being an active member of setting up a resistance? A diplomatic resistance, but a country of resistance that say, no, you have to show bravery. And the only country at the moment, or the small countries that are actually showing bravery in this world, and are not just sitting by and standing still, are the small countries like Belgium, Ireland, and South Africa. South Africa is showing enormous moral leadership in saying, no, we cannot, I hate this word, normalise. Now, what are we normalizing? We're normalizing, what we're seeing in front of us is a Palestinian state being taken apart brick by brick. We're seeing Israeli soldiers forcing mothers to abandon their newborn babies in front of them in the freezing cold. We're seeing rape. We are seeing in Israel this absolutely intent on making Gaza unlivable. And what are we doing? We're normalizing it. We're sitting there and saying, 30,000 deaths? Yeah, fine. Let's look forward to the next and the next. No, we should listen to the anger that was inside us, and the anger inside Jordan, and the anger inside Iraq, and that represents where we should be going.
Well, thank you, David. You are very right in describing us what kind of harmful effects do these conflictual affairs in Gaza have on democracies, on British democracies. And also you underline the importance of the people's perception, and you raise some questions against normalizing this crisis, and also questioning the diplomats and politicians. Well, we have here a special case of South African apply to International Court of Justice, and luckily we are very thankful to Antalya Diplomacy Forum and its organizers. We have a Faisal Davce who has a knowledge on this issue, and not just only from the side of South African experience, earlier experience, but also what kind of lessons we can have for the future of this conflict. So, Faisal, I want to ask you the question that what kind of role do you believe that the media plays in shaping the perceptions of the Middle East conflict, I mean the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and how can we contribute to promoting peace for this conflict?
Thank you. It's 30 years this year since we achieved our democracy in South Africa, our freedom, our liberation. In fact, I think many of you sitting here were not even born then. Let me give you a taste of what apartheid was. See, I'm regarded as a black man. I'm proud of it, black and proud. So when my mother gave birth to me, I was born in a hospital that was for blacks only. When I fell ill, she had to go to a doctor who was black. When I grew up and went to school, I had to go to a school meant for blacks only. The house we lived in was in an area demarcated for blacks only, the area, the suburb. When I went to university, it was a black-only university. If I decided to go to the beach, this is the bizarre aspect of apartheid. It was a beach designated for blacks only. It used to be written non-whites. We are regarded as non-white. And if I decided to go to a park or go play football or anything like that, it used to be in an area meant for blacks only. And when you died, you were buried in a cemetery that was for blacks only. Think about this. So when South Africa lodged the application at the ICJ, it was not done to get publicity or on a whim. It was done because of a deep desire for freedom, oppression, and to speak out against apartheid. Remember that. And I want to pick up what David has said. It is absolutely shocking that it took South Africa to do it. No one else. This idea of the global South sounds very, very nice. It makes you feel good. But in my mind, it's a fiction. It's a myth. It doesn't exist. Because if it did, there would have been other countries leading that charge. It would have been Turkey. It would have been someone from the Middle East, from North Africa. What is this global South that we talk about? Maybe in the next 2 days, someone will give me that definition. So let me get back to the ICJ. I don't know how many of you saw that presentation. And what struck you about that presentation? The first person to stand up to make South Africa's case, Adila Hassem, considered to be black, a Muslim woman, followed by a black African man, followed by an Afrikaner, white Afrikaner, followed by an white Englishman. That in itself should tell you what South Africa is all about. That the desire for the freedom of Palestinians is ingrained in our DNA. Since our democracy, every president has to address our nation on 2 occasions, in February and in November. For the last 30 years, every speech every president gives makes mention of Palestinians' rights, the inalienable rights of the Palestinians. So in 30 years, 60 speeches have been given about the rights of the Palestinians in our national parliament. So this is something we take very, very seriously in South Africa. Were we worried that there was no one supporting us? Of course we were worried. Of course the country is worried. We now face sanctions from the US and other countries. Where is that global solidarity to support South Africa? I mean, I've seen statements after the fact. Not even 24 hours before South Africa made the application, there was no one. When we look back, there was no one there. But great, everyone came after that. It's fine, we can build on that solidarity. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done. The South African experience, the overthrow of apartheid, took 300 years. And the last 30 years were the most brutal ever experienced. And in spite of Western countries refusing to implement sanctions against South Africa, we were able to mobilize communities and organizations throughout the world to put pressure on the Afrikaner government to such an extent that it was driven to the negotiating table. There are tremendous amount of tactics and strategies that you can do. The sports boycott, trade boycott, arms boycott, academic boycott, all of those things we did. It wasn't one big umbrella. It was little things that we did. When you look at what's happening in Gaza and Palestine, and you can't even call it a genocide because you're afraid that you might lose your job, there is something fundamentally wrong with you. This is a moral struggle. The political struggle against the West is something doesn't matter anymore. It's not important anymore because they've made their point very clear. They regard Palestinians and what Israel is doing part of their whole agenda. Today it's 100, tomorrow it's 200, yesterday it was 1,000. Doesn't really matter. But for people who have a deep sense of humanity and morality, it must matter. You have to care. Because if you don't, ask yourself this question: what is it that drives you as a human being? We as South Africans, we've put Palestine on the top of our agenda. Forget what Nelson Mandela said about the Palestinians. The late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, he said, after he visited Palestine, he said, what I have seen in Palestine is 10 times worse than what we experience in South Africa. Think about that, what I told you about my life experiences, times 10. You get a sense then on the kind of work that we have to do. Tomorrow, I think our foreign minister is here. She has gone under tremendous pressure. They've threatened her family. Not many of you know, but she's given the interview, so I can say this. They've threatened her family, her children. The forces have ganged up against South Africa. But we are unrelenting. Every time, every week, we are knocking on the door of the ICJ and saying, you need to do something. Why can't other countries do that? Thank you.
Well, Faisal, we are speechless with listening your experience with the apartheid regime and the implications of this regime for the crisis in Gaza. You raised skepticism towards the global South. I can share the same idea with you, but at the same time, we are happy to see that South Africa initiated this case against Israeli massacres, and this is a test of humanity, and South Africa proved herself that leading the world, whether global South or any kind of humanity, what we call it. And also, I agree with the reality that we should support the South Africa in this case, not to be punished by sanctions by the US or other countries. Well, I was planning to have a second tour, but we have 15 minutes left, and also I want to hear the questions and comments from the participants. So then I should raise one question for each panelist, and then let the floor to the participants, and your panelists will answer, if you want, my question and also other questions coming from the participants. So for Wata, I want to ask you that what we are losing now while seeing these massacres in Gaza, but doing not enough as humanity. For you, Daniel, you are, I believe that you are closely watching the case against Israel, and what would the implications of this case for the Israeli public opinion? Because some people tell that the direct solution could come from the Israeli people. They can change their government and they would be willing to have a real solution to this Palestinian question. Well, for you, David, what do you expect from this conflict for the future of the Middle East? I will ask again this question. You raised important subjects, but still I want to learn what kind of lessons can we have from this crisis. Well, for Faisal, I was trying to ask you what kind of lessons can we have, but you have still covered that lessons, but I believe that you can add some more. These are the questions of me as moderator. But I will direct the floor to your questions. Please raise your hand if you have comments or questions, but please be brief because we have just 15 minutes.
Thank you for coming. Firstly, before I ask my question, I really want to thank to South Africa for taking the initiative and doing things in their parliament. As you talked about, the South Africa take initiative and took this problem to the International Court of Justice. Why the Arabian neighbors, the Gaza's neighbors, doing nothing while the South Africa leading this problem? And my second question is, will the Western world support the South Africa in this court?
So, to whom you are directing your question? One of our panelists or all of them?
All of them.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you for coming. My question is, after 9/11, in the global world, we see that there's an anti-Islamic or Islamophobia spreading all around the world. But after October 7, do you think that this Islamophobia is gone or disappear in the world, or the people are become trying to learn what is Islam, and especially the Western world? And what do you think about? Do you think that they changed their mind about Islam? And what do you think about the Middle East people? Because when we say the Middle East, the first thing came our mind is Islam. So my question is this.
Thank you.
So much.
I think Wata and David would answer these questions. Okay, from the back.
Thank you for this opportunity. My question is very brief. Do you think that the United Nations system has failed on us, considering the comments of Mr. Hanfar? Because we see that the practical contradictions on the Western governments, but at the same time from the South Africa and from Chile, from Mexico, from Indonesia, from Spain, from Ireland, we see a movement that is inclined towards embracing the values that have been drawn under the United Nations umbrella. So in near future, do you think that we'll see a shift from the concept of international and multilateralism to regionalism or to other maybe structures, considering the dilemmas that is promised, that is seen after the after Israel's conflict operation on the Palestinian?
A question for all panelists?
All panelists, yeah.
Okay, thank you. The lady from the front.
Thank you. I have a question for all the panelists. I want to ask, the current understanding of state depends on a boundary and the people, the same people, culturally, languagely, nationally, and the homogeneity of it. How can we expect a support for Palestinian people reasonably under such international system that depends on these national states, as every country has its own, historical instances of eliminating the other?
Okay, thank you. Well, yeah.
Maybe you touched upon this question, but I just want to ask your opinion about two-state solution and whether it's possible now, whether it would really create the conditions for dismantling apartheid in Palestine.
To Daniel or all of them?
Whoever wants to.
Okay. One last question.
My question is only one person, David Hurst. It's about European politics. That's why I was going to ask you. Conservative Christian thoughts are breaking the hope of immigrants. I was thinking maybe we can shape this topic about hope, about the immigrants who went to Europe. And as you said, there is an increased Islamophobia, racism, and even politicians are not scared to make hateful speeches. However, liberals are having a comeback in some states, and I was thinking maybe in the future, in other states as well, maybe liberals can bring a balance towards this, against the conservative Christian thoughts about immigrants. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, it's great to hear questions, but at the same time, we wonder what are the answers, and there is no enough time to answer all of them, but still each panelist has 2 minutes. So I'm strict on that because the time is up. Okay. Let's first with Waka.
Okay. Thank you very much. 2 minutes, 2 points. A, the current nation state in the region is incapable of doing a lot for its interest, because it is a creation of the Western hegemony and the Western plan. Technically speaking, our countries, especially the countries in the Arab world, are planned and executed, and their existence is all owed to the British and the French. So it is not the state that has been designed to serve the interests of the people of the region. It is the state that was designed to serve the interests of the West. This is why we have paralysis now, total paralysis. And I do not expect much of the current elite. If we need to have an imagination, we need to start thinking of an architecture in the future that could really restore a sense of dignity to the people and a sense of interest-based policies to our countries. And this is very important topic for me. And I do believe that we are still living the phase of 1919 when they divided us, the chaps and the maps era, and we are still committed to it. While the rest of the world moved on, we still worship the borders and the flags given to us by Sykes-Picot. So this is number one. So we need to work on that. The second point on the issue of Palestine and Gaza. In 1982, the Israelis occupied Lebanon, and they forced PLO to leave Beirut to Tunisia, and later on to give up on the armed struggle. Technically, it was impossible for them to do armed struggle after 1982. The Israelis celebrated, the Israelis won the last victory, the Israelis are secure, the Palestinians are totally marginalized, and the PLO at that time has been blown, apart by that particular issue. 1987, the world witnessed the most noble intifada that the humanity has ever seen. The ordinary people of Palestine carried on rocks and the stones and they start stoning the Israeli soldiers. 120,000 people were imprisoned, and for 5 years, the people of Palestine, the ordinary people, men, women, and children, old and young, continued their intifada. They lost 40-50% of their economy, but they did not stop until, unfortunately, 1993, when Oslo Agreement was signed as a result of that. And then, 30 years since 1993, we went into this current situation where we are always promised the great empire of Palestine, isn't it? which has no border, which has very limited portals, no control over water, no control over the sky, no control over anything, no military, nothing, but call it a great empire of Palestine. We have been deceived by the concept of the two-state solution. We will be the most stupid people on earth to accept the two-state solution as the plan of the next day after Gaza. Because it means we are going back 30 years back, and these 30 years, we did not understand the lesson. Yes, I am a great advocate of the one-state solution, to answer your question. And the one-state solution that I'm arguing, it is the only moral solution for the land of Palestine. It is the only logical and historical and real solution on long run. You could argue that we might need a temporary transition into that, but I'm afraid that this temporary transition into canceling the partition is actually going to be permanent process. There will be no solution based on two states. It is impossible. It is another phase of freezing the conflict until we jump into another battle and another fight. So we need to think of South Africa. Now all of us are clapping for South Africa, celebrating South Africa. What did South Africa do? South Africa realized that the humans are equal and they could live together. Now we say, if the Jews would like to be in that land, they are most welcome. Of course, we have never been against Jews. But let the Israelis refuse it, because the Zionist movement will never accept to look at Palestinians as equal. Let them refuse it and pay the price for refusing that. But we as Palestinians, we should never accept 22% of historical mandated Palestine and claim that we have achieved our rights. It's impossible. What about the refugees? What about the sovereignty of the land that we have? It's impossible that this is going to be the last solution. It's going to be a beginning of a much more bloodier conflict in the future.
Well, thank you, Adda. Well, I wonder, Daniel, what would you say about this two-state solution?
I'm going to address that. I'm going to try and make 3 points. I'll make them as quickly as I can, and I'll apologize in advance to the translation people. So first, on this question of has the UN failed, what's going on at the International Court of Justice, the key thing is if you are doing something and it is illegal, it is criminal, and it is wrong, and there is no cost or consequence in your personal life, in your business life, or as a state, then you're not going to change. And so what the International Court of Justice cases, both the one, and more importantly, in fact, the one brought by South Africa, and the call for an advisory opinion for those who followed this last week, this is to challenge Israeli impunity, because impunity is what leads to extremism by Israel. It's what leads to the destruction, and to hold Israel accountable. And if there is not a different cost structure, a different incentive structure, I do not think there will be change. Now, the problem is, well, first of all, you have to go to the court because the UN system is broken. Go back and look at the history of America using its veto in the UN Security Council. It does it over Israel. America has used its veto always over Israel. It's used it as much as all the other countries added up. But court rulings do not implement themselves, okay? So we have to understand there are also limitations. And this is where all kinds of other holding accountable, ending impunity, sanctioning. We talked here about arms trade, the economy. People, you're all consumers in your individual life. You make a choice what product to buy, what not to buy. So all these things matter if that situation is going to change. Secondly, the question of Islamophobia was raised, and I just want to very briefly say, I don't want to be over-optimistic and suggest that we're seeing a sea change, a post-9/11 moment, but there's Palestine and then there's global Palestine. And what many people here have talked about is the way in which people see in this struggle an avatar for a much bigger struggle. And I think, and the coolness, right? It's become cool, the songs, the videos, the dance, coolness amongst horrendous realities. What I think that will change how some people view Muslim communities in those places in the West where that kind of mobilization of a generation around Palestine has happened. And crucially, I would say, that standing up for Palestine against Israel's violations of international law and its policies, including if you're Jewish, is not anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism is a thing, but that is not the thing. And standing up for Palestine is not being an extremist, quite the opposite. It's having the humanity and the morals that Faisal talked to us about. 2 states. Look, what we have at the moment is that Israel has created a one-space reality of apartheid. And that's, in addition to the things that you talked about, it's the demographic re-engineering, where people can live where they can't live. It's resource allocation, land allocation. Now, I believe that if the struggle is over equality in this reality that Israel has created, maybe Israel will turn around and say, oh my goodness, we can't share the land with these people. We'll have to pull back the occupation. If that happens, none of us are going to be against the end of occupation. But it doesn't mean, as Israel tried to impose in the past, the end of the claims of the refugees. It doesn't mean the end of the struggle for equality for those Palestinians who live inside Israel. But I do think that partition has been used as a tool of structural violence, as a tool of dehumanization, and it's mutual dehumanization, and as a tool of apartheid. So I think we have to open our eyes and look at this option that Wada said, this option of equality, because it's the way we can rehumanize each other as well. Now, I'll close by saying this. To do that, we need people power, but we do need state power. That's why it mattered what South Africa did. That's why it matters what other state actors are going to do. And here, we should think about building a coalition of like-mindeds, because if we try and go too broad, then it's lowest common denominator. We can all issue a declaration at the end of a conference, and it means nothing. But if countries who are really willing to act mobilize together, then maybe they can do some of the things South Africa has done and have each other's backs. And if we can shift that narrative, not to go back to talking about 2 states, but to talk about apartheid, we can shift how we mobilize and campaign and do advocacy, then I think we can change the power and change the reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, David, it's your floor.
I mean, many of the points I was going to make have been made much better by Daniel and Wada. I mean, what lessons can we learn from this crisis? Well, we cannot repeat the mistakes of the past. And Oslo wasn't just a hoax, but it was also a system of assumptions that carry on very, very much to this day, and you can all list them. The assumption is that Palestinians can't choose their own leader. It has to be vetted first by someone else, and that leader has to be a safe one, a mukhabarat, or someone who is comfortable in Washington and Tel Aviv. It can't be someone who's in prison. There's an assumption there. I mean, if you could actually imagine what a Palestinian state would look like on any land with all of those attitudes still in past. No, you can't have Hamas, you can't have free elections, you can't have any elections at all, because there might be some sort of free choice involved here. And by the way, every time you want to fly anywhere, you need our permission. I mean, just what sort of state would that be? The 2-state solution has never, ever, and I would say even before the Madrid conference, been about 2 states. I had a fascinating conversation before he died with a former advisor of King Hussein, who shuttled between Yevgeny Primakov, who was then the Soviet Union's man in the Middle East, and Baker, who was then the Secretary of State, the US Secretary of State. And it was a fascinating discussion about actually, this was a long time before Madrid. This was King Hussein trying to find out from his man there what was going to happen at the Madrid conference. And Baker just simply told him, quite simply, look, forget the Palestinian state. It's not going to happen. What you're going to have is something more than a local authority and less than a state. And that was before, and Yevgeny Primakov, the Russian, said, forget a Palestinian state, it's not going to happen. We're not talking about that. And that's before Madrid. So in fact, how much has actually changed? What we've now got to do is say that, and recognize the fact that an Israeli politician who is prepared to forcibly evict up to 1 million settlers in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and in the Golan Heights doesn't exist. He hasn't been born. If that is the reality, then those settlers will stay there. If those settlers stay there, everyone stays where they are, and there has to be a right of return as well. If we're actually going to have this Palestinian state starting, it has to be done on extremely different lines to the one that is there now. There's none there now, but you cannot have a formula of one state which is being formulated and has expanded and expanded. You know, what has happened during the Gaza campaign? There have been something like 600 settler attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank. That's what's really happening. It's what's happening off stage that matters. Israel is, with all its different tribes, with all its wars, with all the splits between the military that are not prepared to go into Rafah or can't go into Rafah just yet, and the political elite, it has a common purpose. It has a DNA, and that DNA is to expand and kick Palestinian farmers out. And that has to be combated. And the only way you can do that now is by devising a settlement on equal citizenship. It's the only formula left. Now, you can call it what you like. You can call it a confederation. You can call it a Jewish state when it comes to Israeli sovereignty. You can call it a Palestinian state when it comes to Palestinian sovereignty. There are myriad and one ways of doing this, but we have to now completely rethink the Oslo formula from the bottom up. On the question of immigrants, this is, I can't be optimistic because this is something that is happening Europe-wide. Look at the debate in Italy. Look at the debate in Germany and in France. The far right is actually on the move. And you have a killer combination of immigration and neoliberalism. And the two really don't match because you have the white working class saying, sorry, where are our hospitals? Where are our flats? You're giving all this to the immigrant, you're not giving it to us. And it's a really, really powerful motor. And you're having the build-up of a really potent anti-immigrant constituency in all European countries that are a bastion, or thought of themselves as a bastion of liberalism. What has to happen is that a lot of things have to happen. We have to actually start building schools and houses properly for everyone, and we have to totally calm the situation down. But I'm sorry, I can't say any of this is going to happen quickly or immediately, because there is no mood in any part of Europe for generosity.
Thank you, David. Well, we have just only 2 minutes for Faisal. I am sorry to say that. Yeah, please.
I have 1 minute, yeah. So there's no big grand lessons about the apartheid struggle. There's nothing, there's no glory moment. In early 1980s, a group of businessmen, white businessmen, and predominantly bankers, decided to meet with the ANC in exile. That created a massive shock in South Africa. How is it possible that big business that controlled the economy decided to go and meet these terrorists? I remember the ANC, and up till 1995, Nelson Mandela couldn't visit Washington because he was still designated as a terrorist. I don't know if you know that. They had to pass a special law to remove him from the terrorist list. So, in the minds of the people, why are these bankers going to meet with the ANC? Because the bankers and the businessmen realized that at a certain point, apartheid is not sustainable. The idea of the separation of people is not sustainable, besides the fact that it was affecting their profits, their bottom line. But come 1985-86, the state was at its most vicious. It killed thousands of people. I had to leave my home in 1988. I had a knock on my door, it was the security police. We decided I had to go to London and just wait. 1990, 1 year after that, the Afrikaners, the government decided to unban the ANC. So, in my mind, the big grand gestures are there, they're good, they have a lot of publicity. But once you start to destabilize this edifice, slowly but surely, it will be destroyed. Anything abnormal, apartheid was abnormal, it was a crime against humanity, designated by the UN. Anything that is abnormal has a limited lifespan. I agree with David. There is not that figure that's going to turn this around in Israel. You can hope and pray. That's it. My last lesson.
Please. Yeah.
Why Palestine is still important. Many of you know of Cape Town. Beautiful city, mountain, and all of that. It's the capital city of the province of Western Cape, Western Province. For the last 14, 15 years, it's been governed by the opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, predominantly white businessmen who run this. They're very good at running it. And in the province, there's a huge Muslim population. And for the last 2 elections, the opposition party won because of the Muslim vote. This year we have elections in May 29, we have elections, national elections. And for the first time in the last 15 years, the opposition party that's been ruling are in danger of losing the Muslim vote because of Palestine.
Thank you. Thank you.
From the domestic to the international, for us, Palestine is still important. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, would you join me in thanking Turkish Foreign Ministry for organizing Antalya Diplomacy Forum and our panelists for expressing their extremely important ideas on the Middle East.